So, hi there, and welcome to the Look-See for January 2024. This is a bit of a look ahead at what's happening in our world and where we're going. And because it's the beginning of the year, I really kind of ended up looking at the whole year rather than just the next month. It's something that includes a combination of things, some news, some commentary, some synthesis of factors that are out there for us to consider. So let's begin. Number one, a fast growing sector of America is tired of everything from Joe Biden, Schumer, Pelosi, and Hunter to Trump, the election drama, the banks, and the wars. So the wake up continues to spread and to intensify, and it gets more intense every month for the whole year. Number two, I saw a serious train wreck. It was, I thought, in the mountains or on the side of a mountain. I wasn't sure where it was, but I had the impression that it was in the southern part of the US and had a precious cargo. And when I saw it, it almost looked like the nose of the engine was poking out of a pile of dirt, as if a landslide had fallen on it, maybe, or maybe an avalanche. I wasn't sure. Number three, toward the fall and through 2025, it looked like all of next year, I saw a number of organized gangs in quite a few big cities. It looked like they had divided the city up among themselves because there were not enough police to deal with the gangs, and so the gangs were taking over. When I tracked backwards to see where they began, it looked like they started with looting and then became organized as gangs. Because of the gangs, theft continued to increase in cities and then moved from big box stores to smaller businesses, then to homes in neighborhoods and suburbs. Some places end up paralyzed because of gang control. And this led to vigilante groups forming to counter them. To me, this is something that we would do well to head off, to support the police or whatever it takes to avoid such a situation. Number four, food systems across the US, and in fact, all of the West, Europe and America, go down another notch over this year, but the number and variety of things that people are growing in home gardens increases dramatically. People have moved beyond growing a tomato and a pepper. I saw quite an increase also in the number of fights between city council or city planners and residents over chickens in the backyard, as well as yards that were tilled to plant gardens right out to the curb. In some places, there were fights and pilfering of curbside food, but in other places, in fact, in quite a few places, those people who had deliberately planted out in front of the house and right out to the curb had the attitude that those who are hungry could come and get something to eat. In other words, it was meant to be something helpful. I thought that was beautiful. Okay. Number five, the food shortages in the US eventually end up creating what might be called a black market for raw milk. Only a dozen or so states allow retail sales of raw milk. The rest require farms to have various permits and licenses, and customers have to drive to the farm to get the milk. As food shortages increase, several more states begin considering enacting laws to allow the sale of unpasteurized milk and cream. But The new milk laws are kind of after the fact laws because people who are still mobile are already driving to farms, buying quantities of milk, and then selling it from their suburban neighborhood homes. It looks like part of a let's work together to feed ourselves attitude that takes over as the food supply goes down and the prices go up. I thought that was very interesting as well. Number 6, there was a feeding frenzy or a feeding fight, maybe, in the banking world. It looked like a big bank had gone down, and this was triggering the frenzy. I wasn't sure which one had gone down. Maybe Chase, Citibank. Those are my top 2. Could be Wells Fargo. But I thought it was either Chase or Citibank. Anyway, there was a fight among the survivors over who was going to take over the remaining assets. BlackRock was involved in that fight as well. And that didn't really make any sense to me because they are not a bank, but they were still trying to claim some of the assets. Number 7, speaking of the banking world, it looked like there are delays in their attempts to install CBDCs. In fact, in spite of several years of claims that they're coming, when I looked ahead, the CBDC issue just kind of went along, and then all of a sudden, boom, like it fell off a cliff very suddenly. So I'm not sure what's happening there with CBDCs. Number 8, the Vatican. I was looking at the Vatican. It is considering opening its secret library for some very high fees. The Vatican appeared to be under severe stress and may be facing bankruptcy. That was kind of shocking. Number 9, Germany begins breaking from the EU toward the end of the year. Poland fractures and kind of does the same thing, breaks away, starts to move. Looks like it's moving in that direction. Denmark quietly reorganizes itself, and then Austria begins moving away from the EU. So all of this appears to be forced by angry, rioting populations who've had enough, and they are on the move. Number 10, this was not good. Something happened to Klaus Schwab's family or someone in his family. I think it involved some kind of accident. I couldn't see much, but I could see water. And I thought it might involve a swimming pool, maybe. The water looked pretty clear. Number 11, shoes become more expensive and difficult to get in the US toward the end of this year. And I saw the same thing once before, a few years ago, but that was very temporary and mostly amounted to a jump in prices. But this time it looked a little more serious, like some sizes could not be gotten, and they were expensive. Number 12, something interferes with the US presidential election in the fall. It looks like there's a serious delay or even a postponement, quite a postponement. My immediate assumption was that it probably had to do with belated attempts to straighten out problems with the various methods of voting. However, when I went to look more closely, I saw those like those yellow police ribbons that mark off the area of a crime or a murder scene. I wasn't sure how to interpret the police ribbons. Do they indicate death? Or is the voting apparatus the scene of a crime? Anyway, it also looked like some kind of big weather or natural disaster had occurred. And I can't quite imagine what kind of weather event would impact the entire US due to the wide range of weather conditions that exist from north to south to east to west. But it could be some kind of big natural disaster causing that delay or contributing to that delay. So keep my eye on that. Number 13, more schools consolidate due to not enough money to keep all of the schools in their districts open and functioning. Some high schools return to online classes only. That leaves only elementary schools open and functioning in those places. And I'll just kind of comment, it looked like they were trusting that the high school students were mature enough and able to take care of themselves, but not little kids. And so they were trying to keep elementary schools open so the little ones could still attend school. However, by 2025, it looked like the trend toward closing and consolidating was spreading, especially in the eastern half of the US. By the end of 2025, hardly anyone was attending schools, and it went down from there. So part of the reason for this was because people were not working, and those who did work were working from home. No one was trusting schools. No one wanted to be on the roads going to and from schools. And the attitude toward learning in schools was shifting steadily to homeschooling and what's called IEP, individual or individualized education plans, often done online. Number 14, there's a serious shuffling of power in England. There appear to be three factions involved in this: the royal family, a Muslim faction, and a faction composed of English commoners trying to hang on to power. And it looked like London was temporarily segregated into political, religious sectors or sections or areas, but it doesn't last for more than a few years. Number 15, the war in Ukraine becomes a rout by the Russians. And I saw white flags all over the area. It takes another year or two to come to new agreements about who controls what. And while we're on the topic of Ukraine, I want to share a bit of my own learning experience. In 2022, I saw the end of the war coming in August of that year. I wrote about it in my look-see, and my interpretation was something like, don't worry, it's not going to go on very long. So that was in the first year of the war, and here we are heading almost into the third year, and it's still going on. Or at least we're being told it's still going on. The fact that the war didn't end in August of 2022 prompted me to watch what was going on there very closely and what was happening there in order to understand what I saw. You always want to learn from things that you see that don't happen, because it helps you interpret better down the line in the future. So in looking more deeply at the situation, what I noticed was that in August of 2022, I'm going to call it the kind of war Russia was conducting ended. They went from carefully trying to avoid too much damage to people and infrastructure in the hopes that the US and NATO would back down, But by August, September of 2022, they realized that the US and NATO were not going to back down and were going to continue pushing Ukraine to fight. With that realization, Russia's entire mood and approach changed by the end of August of 2022 from one of timidity and caution to one of all out fighting. So I think I misinterpreted the end of the timid phase of the war as the end of the war. And it was just the end of a particular approach to the war. It's also possible that the war could have ended at that point, was going to end at that point, but decisions were made to keep it going, which perfectly illustrates the dynamic nature of our reality. Anyway, I think it's important to go back and look at things that didn't happen and try to learn from them. Things change all the time, and nothing is set in stone. So looking at the future is really only useful because seeing where you're heading allows you to prepare for what you see. Be ready for change. And if you don't like what you're seeing, make some efforts to create that change. Number 16. The war in Israel drags on for a while, but eventually support from the U.S. just looked like it fizzled, leaving Israel without support from anyone. Both the U.S. and Israel are left to deal with the legacy of the mess they have created. I did see that Netanyahu is eventually tried for war crimes. Few people understand the complex relationship between Israel and the U.S. Very few. I was quite surprised to see that the release of Jeffrey Epstein's flight logs eventually brings people of the U.S. to realize that Israel was carefully and deliberately compromising American politicians with honey traps in order to get control of the U.S. Through the combination of AIPAC, it's called, multinational corporations and blackmail, Israel has owned America for many years. America has been sending huge sums of money to Israel, making decisions, sometimes egregiously biased decisions, that favor Israel, backing Israel militarily, and bending to Israeli will for decades, maybe close to as long as Israel has existed. Number 18. The entire world seems to lose steam in the face of one shocking revelation after another that continues all year. People everywhere, even the Chinese, are sitting back on their heels as if stunned, as if not certain what to think, what to believe in, or what to do. This is actually a window of opportunity for peace, coming together, working together as planetary citizens. So will we take that opportunity? Number 19. I saw this last month, and so I went to look at it again. By mid to late January, there's a split of some kind running through the political camps, especially the Republican camp. Some of them are worried that Trump could win, but then not have the full support he needs to rebuild the country. This was an energetic split. It was a split among Republican conservatives who've been supporting Trump. And it looks like the split is based on vague suspicions among the people that Trump is not all that he has been made out to be. In trying to tune in well enough to see what the suspicion is related to, I could not put my finger on anything specific. All I can say is that it's a very subtle feeling that hovers around the uncertainty about Trump, the MAGA movement, and even more so about government in general. There's this vague doubt that seems to be growing. Regarding Trump, it's as if people are stepping back, looking at the big picture, and saying things like, the constant push of the negative narrative about Trump is just too much, and our tendency to support the underdog is being played. Or the constant negative focus on Trump is just over the top. It feels like the whole drama is being pushed down our throats. But why? Is there something else happening that we are being distracted from? Or something seems off. Something's not right. But I just can't put my finger on it. Or simply, man, there's too much drama. Government needs to be quiet and go back to handling government things. We don't need to be told how to live, what to eat, what to buy, or what to drive. So maybe it's just that people are not trusting anything anymore or anyone in a position of power, nor do they trust the news business. There are questioning attitudes towards news leaks that are perceived to be timed too perfectly. For people to think that things are being timed too perfectly indicates that they are seeing a pattern that they deeply distrust. Another thing I saw while looking at this energetic split was that even when events or announcements were promising and moving toward what might be called normal times, there was this general attitude that could be described as, I'm done with government and the old days, or whatever might be thought of as normal. So questions kept coming up around QAnon, Trump's son-in-law, and around what looks more and more like a carefully controlled and orchestrated dance leading to what? There's no answers. People were focused on the future and asking, where are the conversations about solutions, about justice, reason, truth, or something new that actually works? Maybe it could be summed up by saying it was as if people want government to go away, or at least get out of the way and let them get on with life that's focused on taking care of themselves and one another. Number 20. The spread of information about the Bible coming from the books Gods of the Bible and the Naked Bible has a very serious impact on the MAGA Trump movement, which is heavily Christian-backed. People suddenly look very carefully and more in-depth than usual at our political, government, media situation. And some back way off because they see a heavy aura of justification of the Trump MAGA group, which continues to use the Bible and Christian dogma as their permission to fight and to seek power. But people don't seem to comprehend the existence of God outside the Bible. So I'm just going to say here, people, the Bible is a book. It's a book that was mistranslated. Correcting the translation or revealing the shenanigans of religion does not negate the existence of God. God is. And I can personally attest to that. The good news in all of this is that many begin to ask questions, to honor their own gut feelings that something about the whole religion thing is not quite right. And all of that leads to truth and true spirituality, which is wonderful. Number 21. As we move forward, there will be fewer and fewer jobs available for people. And many of those that are available are not paying enough to live on. And thus, they're a waste of time. Why spend 8 or 9 hours of every day plus travel time working at something that only pays $30,000, $40,000, or even $50,000 a year when it generally takes at least $65,000 to $75,000 to live in a reasonable neighborhood, pay property taxes if you own your home, drive a decent car, buy good quality food and clothing, pay for electricity, heat, cooling, water, phone, and internet services, pay for property insurance, whether renters or homeowners, cover your medical insurance, afford car insurance, registration, repairs, and upkeep, pay taxes on everything you buy, cover home repairs and upkeep, purchase new appliances or equipment when needed, cover medical bills that aren't covered by medical insurance, pay for education for yourself, your children, or even your grandchildren, and pay for all of the subscriptions that suddenly seem to be the only way to get news and entertainment. Again, living expenses vary significantly by location, but we can use some average numbers. The average monthly living expenses for a single person in the USA are $3,189 per month, which is $38,266 per year. The average cost for a family of 4 is $7,095 per month, which is $85,139 per year. And I can't remember where I heard or read just the other day that middle class income is now considered to be at $130,000 a year. So keep those numbers in mind and ask yourself, who can afford to go to work when it doesn't cover the cost of living? Why would anyone bother? Setting the stage for universal basic income and massive poverty. Okay, number 22. The fraud that has been part and parcel of big business and banking begins to roll out like manure from the back of a manure spreader. It will prove to be good fertilizer, however, for fertile minds thinking of starting a small business of their own in order to step into the gap left by big box stores struggling with more and more shoplifting, theft, and reports of fraudulent business practices. All of this makes people think twice about doing business with those big box stores, and others are actually afraid to go out to the store. I thought that had something to do with the gangs. Number 23. Staying on the theme of money and business, not so much in 2024, but leading up to and looking out a little further over the coming years, the big box stores and big chains shrink quite a lot, and more than a few go out of business. How will this affect our ability to find the products and supplies we need? If you look back at the alleged virus and lockdowns, the big box stores enjoyed exploding profits, while thousands of smaller businesses were forced to close. However, greed has a way of pulling the rug out from under the greedy. Their problem is that they just don't know when to quit. Most big box stores have become dumb as a box of rocks. They kept cutting corners. They kept refusing to raise wages. They kept laying off good, experienced people and hired kids much more cheaply who had no commitments. People with commitments, such as to feed a family, get an education, or provide quality work that leads to raises and promotions, are much more stable. So through all of this, we, the people, have been left to deal with poor service, skeleton staff in many stores, and very cheaply made products. These products often cost a small fortune and many don't work well. If we talk about clothing, many items are all out of shape and look 20 years old after one washing. Because of lingering anger over the way things have been handled over the past few decades and especially the last few years, and resentment about our declining ability to have a meaningful say in our lives, a small stream of people begins going back into business for themselves. This small stream becomes a river, then a sea, then an ocean of small businesses over the next 4 to 5 years. Oddly, this wave of small business startups helps bring down the IRS. The reason is because the sheer numbers of people starting businesses run into a big shortage of bookkeepers and accountants, a serious shortage. People stop filing taxes then because they can't find anyone to help them, and the business taxes are too complex for many to deal with. The tax system has become a massive game of filing papers and trying to keep up with the changes in tax law that are designed to trip you up and punish you with penalties and interest, if not outright forfeiture. The remaining government, still in existence 4 or 5 years from now, is barely limping along and cannot follow up on the tax situation. Number 24. Another result of the shortage of bookkeepers and accountants is the appearance of AI software programs that can be set up to do your bookkeeping for you by routing transactions immediately into various types of income and expense categories. These programs will also reconcile your accounts, close the books each month, and print out cash flow reports, profit and loss statements, and balance sheets at any moment in time. Wow. Number 25. People in our world have long been wedded to the idea that their education makes them special, and their job gives them their identity. What will people do when they have no jobs and the education they spent years getting and paying for is no longer needed? Think about this so that you are not hit broadside by a loss of your job. As you think about it, remember that your work identity is only a piece of who you are. Where's the rest of you? Play with describing yourself in different ways according to your interests, passions, skills, characteristics, standards of health or integrity or ethics, or your dreams of the future you would like to be part of. Number 26. We seem to do well, and there's lots of progress in dealing with governance and money, media and medicine, truth and consequences until the early part of May, when something upsets a lot of people. I saw this early May period as a trouble spot last month, but I couldn't see what the obstacle was. It may be something involving the World Economic Forum, in which case it may be that what upsets people is the handing over of U.S. sovereignty to the WEF regarding health, pandemics, digital ID, vaccinations, and things of that nature. Heads up, guys. Number 27. I thought it was toward the end of February, maybe not. I hesitate here, but what I saw was it looked like a law is quietly put in place that has to do with finance. But I didn't think it was imposing CBDCs. It was written to look just, like just another inane, irrelevant guideline so that nobody would pay attention to it. However, it put another steel bar in place in the construction of the financial prison being built around the common man. As I watched this, I wondered what made the elites think that they could get away with what they were trying to do, which was to get total control. And then I heard a voice say, as I was wondering what made them think they could do that, the message in the voice said was they get away with it because they know that people want the rule of law. That's why people don't stand up and fight. The controllers know this, and they take advantage of it. This message about standing up to fight reminded me of the conversation I had with my father many years ago. It was Thanksgiving dinner, and everyone was seated around the table when I shared the news that I had gotten a letter from a childhood friend. He wrote to tell me that he had just lost an eye in Vietnam. I was quite liberal-minded at that point in my life, and I made the comment that I thought war was stupid. When I made that comment, my father looked directly at me and quietly said, "Sometimes you have to fight." I declared that I wouldn't, and anyone who would go off to kill other people just because their government told them to was a fool. Now, my father had been drafted into World War II, became a paratrooper, and fought in the Philippines. Out of a company of 62 men, he was one of only 2 men who came home alive. Now we locked eyes, and he said, "Do you know that I went across an ocean and killed other young men that I didn't know and didn't want to hurt just to save this country's peace? And now you're telling me that you wouldn't fight to keep what I risked my life to make sure you had?" No, I said slowly, uncertainly. I wouldn't kill anyone for any reason. "Do you mean to tell me that if you were in your home and soldiers were coming over the back fence to kill your children and take your property, that you wouldn't fight to keep them away?" He demanded to know in an incredulous voice. I wanted to say, no, I wouldn't, but as I pictured the imaginary soldiers grabbing and hurting my children, my voice died away and I simply stared at my father, unable to deal with the magnitude of a confrontation that might force me to kill or be killed. So think about this. What are you ready to deal with? Number 28. Watching that bar go up on that financial prison being constructed around us left me with questions. Can we win a war without fighting? Can 330 million people rely on a handful of whistleblowers and brave lawyers to do our fighting for us? Can we outlast the legal and financial maneuvers designed to exhaust us to the point that we cave in and give up our freedoms and self-governance because we just want things to go back to some kind of normal? Would we have any peace of mind without those freedoms and self-governance? There are rules governing war and fighting, but what if the enemy fights dirty? What do we do then? Can we win if half the people don't really understand what is going on and how they have been programmed and mind controlled and propagandized? Wouldn't that be an undisciplined, scattered, even half-hearted effort? Sort of like herding cats? If we have to fight, what is the best way to do so effectively? Certainly, we are not going to get anywhere if only a few dozen people take a stand. And how could we let them, knowing what would happen? Look at what happened to 3,800 people because of the January 6th propaganda. Again, and I'll close with this. What are you ready to deal with? Let's hold ourselves together and one another together over the coming year. And that's it for this Look-See. For those who are watching or listening for the first time, the Look-See is a brief look at what's happening in our world and where the big trends are heading. Reality is not fixed. It's very dynamic and it changes according to what we are doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real. We do that by making a choice, taking some kind of action, putting something together or taking it apart. And those decisive actions are what determine the path and the outcome. And of course, once we set something in motion, it takes a lot to make a change or get things going in another direction. So be careful about what you set in motion or allow to be set in motion. And that's exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction we see things going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way or prepare for what may look inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help things along. So I'll just say it's important to look ahead and assess what's happening and where we are going so we know whether or not we need to do something different. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll close with this. It's a quote from Robin Kimmerer. Transformation is not accomplished by tentative waiting at the edge. Wading, W-A-D-I-N-G. Have a great month.